Welcome to the Sisterhood of Sweat. I am here today with Matthew Pollard. Matthew Pollard is responsible for 5 multi-million-dollar business success stories, all before the age of 30. His humble beginnings, the adversities he faced, and his epic rise to success show that anyone with the right motivation and the right strategies can achieve anything they set at their mind to. Yeah, I love that. I'm always telling you guys that. Today, Forbes calls him the real deal. Well, I love that. I love that. Global Gurus list him as a top 3 sales professional. Top Sales World magazine named him a top 50 speaker. And Big Speak lists him as an international top 10 sales trainer. He's also the best-selling author of The Introverts Edge, which hit the Amazon charts as the 8th most sold book of the week, appears on HubSpot list of the most highly rated sales books of all time, and was selected by Book Authority as number 2. Best introvert book of all time. His soon to be released second book is The Introverts Edge to Networking. And he has already received endorsements from Harvard, Princeton, Neil Patel, Michael Gerber, Dr. Ivan Misner, and Marshall Goldsmith. Today's episode, he was so dynamic. He talked about being an introvert in business, how to network as an introvert, what an introvert actually is, and how to find your niche so that your customer is chasing you down instead of you having to price compete, chase after other customers. It just gets you to hone in on your message and your why and your niche. And he also talked about 5 growth strategies that will help to explode your business. And I think he's the guy to go to when before the age of 30, he's responsible for 5 multi-million-dollar businesses. I enjoyed him so much. He has so much to offer. Make sure you tune in, get a pen and a pad of paper so you can take notes on all of the great advice that we got today for free. So without further ado, we're going to tune into this episode with the one, the only, Matthew Pollard. Welcome to the Sisterhood of Sweat. I am here today with Matthew Pollard. And Matthew is a bright light. His book, you can see it is very vibrant. I love the cover. And this is The Introverts Edge. And I am excited to dive into the topic with entrepreneurship, introverts. How does that work with sales, business? Tell me, are you an introvert?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I think that's an important thing to clarify, because I think a lot of people, they see someone who's articulate, successful on stage on a podcast host even, and they assume naturally that they must have this gift of gab. They just have this ability to articulate that they do not, that the person listening just doesn't have. Yet, it doesn't matter that, Oprah Winfrey, David Letterman, you think you can't do small talk, they're both introverts. You think of, people that are dynamic, like Bill Murray, he's an introvert. It doesn't matter what industry you go to. If you look at networking, Ivan Misner, the founder of BNI, the world's largest networking group, is an introvert. Zig Ziglar, the most well-known sales trainer, is an introvert. Yet we believe we can't do these things. And, that's really what I try and confront. My life mission is to really help introverts realize that we're not second-class citizens. Our path to success is just different. But when we learn a system and process to do these, and I call them so-called extroverted arenas, we really can become, not just survive in these arenas, but actually dominate and succeed in a way that extroverts struggle to, because we get to leverage our ability to empathize, to listen, to plan and prepare, which we have in spades. And especially in today's economy, where being a lot more genuine and a lot more thought out about what you want to say is seen as such a high positive. If you learn how to leverage your natural introverted strengths, not try and become more extroverted, you really can succeed. And so yes, I am an introvert. And though a lot of people would say, oh, you were introverted, but you become more extroverted, which firstly is not possible. It's just where you draw your energy from. I draw my energy being by myself. Now, sure, episodes like this take less energy now because I've planned and prepared and because I get to talk about what I'm passionate about. But it doesn't change who I am. And I have not become more extroverted. I have become a better version of myself by planning and preparing and practicing what I want to share in a way that's congruent with me as an introvert.
Now, how do you know if you're an introvert?
Yeah, so I think that psychologists have made this very confusing, and I'll put it clearly, way too confusing. And I think that's because there's a lot of grant dollars on researching things further, so it just becomes more confusing. So I like to get it back to its base terms. And if you don't know if you're an introvert or extrovert, don't feel bad. You know, when I spoke at the, it's called the AAISP, the American Association of Inside Sales Professionals. How's that for an acronym? And when I spoke at that event, it was their, so I spoke at their big national event, but then I did their global leadership summit. And when I did, I sent out a message to all the best in the business in introversion, all the best in the business in sales, right? If you work for a big tech company, and if you're at the top of the game, you're coming to this event. And I asked them if they were introverted or extroverted. And you get some responses like, oh, I was introverted, but don't worry, I'm not now. Like, that's a bad thing, like to be introverted. I see it as your edge. That's why the books are called The Introvert's Edge. But then other people would say, you know, I was extroverted, but since COVID, I feel myself much more introverted now. Again, not possible. You may find that you talk to less people and you've learned an appreciation for time by yourself, but it doesn't change who you are. So we really need to bring it back to base terms, because firstly, if you're listening to this and you have people that work for you and you don't know how to play to their strengths. And you also, if you do know, you also need to understand that it's not a disadvantage. And extroversion, by the way, isn't a disadvantage either. They just need to learn things like active listening and empathy, which introverts have in spades, right? We all have our burdens to bear. But if we come down to the base terms, firstly, we need to understand shyness and introversion, not the same thing. Anxiety and introversion, not the same thing. And highly sensitive people and introversion, not the same thing. Though introversion is a spectrum, it is purely whether or not you draw your energy from being by yourself or you draw your energy from being with others. My good friend Jim Cathcart, you know, he's a most award-winning speaker in the world. He spoke at a conference that I run in Austin. And at the end of this 3-day event that he was involved in, and so was I, he was so charged up that he wanted me to take him to experience the live music capital of the world. He wanted to see Rainey Street in Austin. Me, on the other hand, I was wiped. I mean, I just wanted to go home, put on Netflix, cry a little perhaps by myself, put on a hoodie, and just relax. Yet he was my guest, so I took him to Rainy Street. I never in my life have had to ask a 7-year-old if I can please go home at around midnight. I was so tired. That makes me an introvert and him an extrovert. Now, when I'm talking about what I'm passionate about, I can find, I channel a ton of energy. But when I stop, I feel it. And that's the big difference. Like, I enjoy networking now. I enjoy these types of interviews and I'm good at them. At least I hope that people listening think I'm good at them. But the truth is, it still takes from me, which is why I plan time. Before we started, I said, look, how long, I know what's the optimum time for the interview, but I also I was confirming that I have a buffer to make sure that I can have my downtime before my next session, because I need to recharge. Otherwise, I know that I'm not operating at my best. And as an introvert, half of the time, and as an extrovert too, you have to be honest with yourself. Know your strengths, know your weaknesses. And I know my biggest strength becomes my biggest weakness if I don't allow for that. So my team knows. Don't call me 15 minutes after a podcast interview. Hide me from all potential problems for about half a day before I speak on stage and for an hour and a half afterwards, because it's time that I take to recharge and get focused. As long as I follow those rules, things don't go wrong. So again, introversion is just where you draw your energy from, but it does not define you positively or negatively, whichever you are.
Oh my goodness. So I've always thought I was an extrovert, but now I'm beginning to be wondering because I do have to have my alone time. And I
Yeah.
feel like I would die without it. And I also have to recharge my batteries. So that is interesting. And I listen and observe. Like if I'm in a big group, like I did this online course, Super Connector Media. And I remember like I sat back and listened. And I almost think, well, an extrovert wouldn't do that.
Well, you might find, see, and this is exactly the point, right? A lot of people that have become successful realize that they are introverted. They may have been a little bit quiet, shy, reserved, growing up, and they've learned strategies. I mean, before we got on this interview, you did a classic introverted thing. You had a conversation about the flow, how the introduction was going to go, what the ending would be. When I'm being interviewed by an extrovert, they're like, so happy to see you. They just start talking at me and they're like, all right, let's get on. And we press record, right? And then at the end, they're happy that we had a great conversation, wherever it ends up. Where an introvert, like what you did, you were very happy to have the conversation, but you wanted to make sure it followed a methodical process. And you highlighted, I have all these planned questions. Extroverts have no idea what they're going to ask. A lot of times they don't even know how to introduce me, and they're checking with me on that, right? They also don't care how they pronounce my name, where you practiced several times before you got on. So again, with empathy and understanding, introverts can learn those behaviors. They can learn to plan and prepare. I'm forever telling senior executives in global organizations that the reason why their introverts don't share their ideas in the meeting isn't because Sarah needs to learn how to speak up, but it's because you need to create a plan and an agenda and highlight the questions you plan on asking in advance so Sarah's got time to reflect. Otherwise, don't blame her when she comes to you 3 days later with an even better idea than you've already created action, you've put action into, because that was your failure as a leader. Now, sure, Sarah can learn how to behave differently in order to get more, to do more in those meetings. But as a leader, you also could do more to get the best out of Sarah. Now, for me, I say the same thing about small business owners, right? Yes, we find, I mean, the average introvert would rather get a root canal than go out networking. But the fact is, that's because they try and copy what the extroverts are doing, where they walk in, do you want to work with me? What about you? What about you? Nobody wants to do that. Not even the extroverts, by the way. But that aimless networking that you do when you try and avoid that, which is what do you do? Oh, my day job is this. And, you almost put it down, that's not working either. That's why you walk out with a bunch of business cards of people you're never going to contact. You need to be more strategic. You need to plan, you need to prepare. Now, Dory Clark, a good friend of mine, when she runs networking events, she suggests introductions that people should connect with beforehand, get to know each other. So when they get there, they've got things to talk about. But I find that if I'm going to a networking event, I can find out who's coming. I can look at their profiles, find out what they're into. I go profile shopping and I work out even before I walk into the networking room who it is I'm going to be talking to. Now, if I know that in networking, it feels like a bunch of planned conversations, I'm less anxious. And then funnily enough, I enjoy myself and it takes less energy. So when we say, as introverts, we can't do these things. Firstly, we have to define, am I an introvert? And I'm glad to see you're starting to see, I draw my energy, I need to be by myself, that you're an introvert that has learned strategies for you to be really comfortable, for you to enjoy these behaviors. However, that came with planning and preparation, which I saw prior to you pressing record. We should have recorded that. You could have put it as an off cut at the end so people could see your methodical process for getting ready for the interview, because that is classic introvert behavior.
Oh my goodness. I love it. I love it so much. Now, with introverts, how can they then not feel icky about doing sales? Because that's important to any type of business that you have. It's really actually important in your whole entire life, because I believe everything is a sale.
Yeah, the interesting thing is that the way people perceive sales and networking is transactional. And introverts find transactional things uncomfortable, incongruent, inauthentic, right? People don't like to go to networking rooms with the mindset of I'm trying to find a customer. And we find it hard to have a dialogue with someone where we know at the end we've got to say, do you want to buy this? Well, the answer is you actually shouldn't be doing either of those things. Firstly, networking is not about finding customers. Now, if you happen to run into one and they're like, oh my gosh, I need what you have. Sure, you can talk about it, not at the networking event though. Schedule another call. I promise you'll get interrupted and it will not go well. But more often than not, people don't realize that networking is really about finding what I call momentum partners and champion relationships. People that are excited about what you do and want to introduce you to other people that work with a similar demographic of people, so you can create a constant referral network between the two of you. Now, you may not find that person in a networking room, but if you can inspire them with your passion and your mission for serving others. Now, be clear here. I didn't say sharing, hey, I'm a business coach and I, work with organizations to help them with their sales and marketing. I said passion and mission, i.e., saying something like this. One of the things I love to see more than anything in the world is an amazing introverted service provider with enough talent, skill, and belief in themselves to start their own business. But what I find is more often than not, I just hate seeing this, is they get stuck in this endless hamster wheel of struggling to find interested people, trying to set themselves apart, trying to make the sale, which is why I'm on a mission to help these people realize that they can have a rapid growth business doing what they love, but not by getting better at their functional skill. They're usually amazing at that. Instead, focusing on 3 things outside the scope of their functional skill that allow them to create a business that rolls around them, their family, and their life, not the other way around. What was the difference? I didn't tell you what I do. That comes in the story that I'm going to share. It wasn't so which the average introvert's like, Linda, I'd love to chat with you because I'm hoping you're interested in what I do, because if you work with me, I'll make money and that will help me buy a new car. That is what it sounds like. That is not how we want to sound. But instead, when I say I'm passionate about this and here's the mission I'm on, the change I want to see in the world, people are like, wow, that's inspiring. I want to introduce that person to my Rolodex. Or when I tell a story of someone to educate and inspire while embed me as the only logical choice afterwards, they're like, wow, I want what Wendy had, or I want what Linda had. How do I get more of that? They're going to start asking questions. Again, if you know networking strategy the right way, you choose to be interested before you're interesting, they're also going to give you a lot more time of day. So understanding that the goal is to find these momentum partners, and then secondly, champions, people that give your work credibility. Like Ivan Misner, the founder of BNI, the world's largest networking group, endorsed my networking book. That gives me a ton of credibility, right? So you take these momentum partners that are sharing your work with people and connect it to the credibility that these high-level influencers provide the work that you do. Then all of a sudden, you're not chasing clients, they're chasing you. So all of a sudden, the strategy is different. When you're selling, the same deal. If you can share your passion and mission, if you can share stories to the point that, and by the way, for this to work really well for a small business, you need to know your niche so you can talk about them. Small business is not a niche, by the way. When I started, I worked with just introverted business coaches that wanted to obtain rapid growth, because then I could talk about how I specialized there and I could understand them better than they knew themselves, which made it very easy to sell, to the point where they were falling over themselves to work with me, as opposed to me asking those awkward questions like, do you want to move forward? Or how about I call you back next week, which is horrible. So when the system is right, then selling tends to be less required. And the bulldog techniques that those extroverts feel comfortable with, definitely we don't need to do. I would never do that sort of stuff. So the thing I want everybody to understand is sales, if you start with sales, you've already lost. And then you'll find you're also selling. But if you start with getting your message right, and then knowing your niche and getting your ability to articulate your passion, your mission, your driving why, your stories in the right way, then everything becomes so much simpler. And the way I always suggest people is if they look at it as a system, that system's external to themselves. So they can use their introverted psychology to improve that process like a scientist, right? Instead of going home and beating yourself up about the things that went wrong in the sale or the things that went wrong in the networking event, you say, what was the one thing that I can improve next time based on what happened? And use that as an opportunity to use that reflection, which is a superpower for introverts, in a positive way to improve the process exponentially, one thing at a time. Why one thing at a time? Just like any science experiment. You change more than one thing, you don't know what's blowing up in your face.
I love that. So the networking doesn't have to be so uncomfortable if you're just focusing on improving one thing at a time. And looking at what you learned from the networking event. And generally, you always get something good out of networking. So if you really sit and think about who you connected with, what it led to, and where you're at now. I love that you said niche. Now, why is it so important for us to have a niche? Because I've also heard people say, no, not to have a niche. So why is it important to niche it down and have the message be clear?
Absolutely. So there are a couple of things there. So firstly, having that system's liberating, because then all of a sudden it's not about you. Rejection doesn't feel personal. You're improving the process, which is powerful. Now, niching down makes it easier to discuss passion and mission. So yeah, let's talk about not niching for a second, because a lot of people are worried about niching because they're worried that if they niche, then they're turning down clients. So firstly, niching doesn't mean you need to fire your current clients. Niching doesn't mean that your referrals will stop coming, because firstly, I could put on my website that I'm a dentist and my current clients would still hire me. And secondly, they would still refer me to people, and those people would still reach out and say, Matt, on your website, I'm not sure if you noticed this, but you say you're a dentist, but I got told you do this and I want to hire you to still do that. Can you still work with me? Because most of those introductions are done through email anyway. And when those introductions happen, you can still choose to work with them or choose not to. So what I suggest is that when you niche, you don't choose to exclude everyone else. You don't work exclusively with, you specialize in working with a demographic. Specialty is huge, because when you specialize, it means usually to the listener, I have a greater knowledge in all general areas than the average person, which is why I've been able to specialize. Think about doctors, right? A general practitioner is somebody that has a good understanding of general knowledge. But to be invited into a specialty, you have to be the best at that. How do you specialize unless you're the best to make that decision? So the psychology works really, really well. The next thing is, how do you talk about passion and mission in a way that inspires people if you're just talking about everybody in general? I'm really passionate about people. Who isn't, right? Like, you've got to come up with something that really works. And I'll give you an example, because one of the things that a lot of people will struggle with, by the way, if you come unplanned and prepared, like when I go to networking events, I choose which networking event to go to based on which one's most likely to have my niche there, not which one's closer and sooner, right? The next thing that I look at is all the people. If I'm on meetup.com, or if they don't have like an event structure like that, then I will go to something like their Facebook page or the LinkedIn profile to see some of the photos they've posted, look at the profiles of the people that are tagged in the photos. And when I do that, it's really easy to go profile shopping to work out who I want to talk to. So you don't end up walking in and going, oh gosh, there's no one to talk to. That person looks safe. Talk to them. What do you do? Oh, I sell insurance. Oh no, what have I done? Right? So you've got to make sure that you're talking to the right people. But the reason I use insurance as an example is I actually work with someone that was selling insurance. And he's like, Matt, every time I say I sell insurance, they look at me like, how do I get away from this person? Like, even if I talk to them for like 30 minutes beforehand and give them value and be a really good person, they ask me what I do. I say I sell insurance. Their eyes almost explode out of their face and they want to run away. What do I do about that? And I said, well, let me ask you a question. I said, firstly, you should never introduce yourself by your functional skill. I don't say I'm a sales trainer. I do not say I'm a marketing coach. If I say I'm a sales trainer, people look at me like I'm one step above a scam artist. Introverts specifically, they don't hear anything else past that. They'll explain why as an introvert it's tough for them, and I don't get even the ability to explain, well, hang on, no, I specialize with introverts, right? It's like saying, oh, I've got magic ruby slippers, listen to me. It's too late. They've already decided from hearing that functional skill, they're like, no, thank you. I say I'm in marketing and people say, oh, I need marketing. How much do you cost? Now I'm talking about price. I just met them. Or that's uncomfortable. Or they'll say, oh, I've got a marketing person already. That's awkward. What do I do? Do I just excuse myself to go to the bathroom? Like, there's no way that is a positive situation. So I call myself the rapid growth guy. When people ask me what that is, I then talk about what I love to see, what I hate to see, and the mission I'm on, exactly like I said earlier. And then I say, let me give you an example and I'll tell a story. Again, if I was interested rather than interesting first, then they're going to listen through that. Secondly, people have to work out what you are before they can disqualify. So they're engaged. But occasionally people are like, well, I want to work with everybody. And Nick was like that. He's like, I want to work with everybody. And I said, okay, do you really want to work with everyone? Like, if I earned $50,000, or I would, or somebody else earned $250,000 a year, which one of those would you be more likely to want to work with? He said, obviously the 250,000. I mean, he could buy more stuff. Like, so clearly not everybody then. Okay, but this is the wrong motive, like making more money. So it's the wrong motive to focus on. So let me ask you a different question. Let's say one person grew up poor, studied every day, graduated high school and got accepted into Harvard with a scholarship, worked really hard in that qualification, got a degree, got a C-level executive job, and now makes $250,000 a year. Versus the other person that dropped out of college, saved up and started their own business, and now has a team of people that work for him, and he makes $250,000 a year. Which one of those would you prefer to work with? And his response was obviously the small business owner. I'm like, why obviously? That guy that went to Harvard, I mean, that's pretty impressive. His response was, I just feel like they deserve it more. I'm like, tell me about that. He said, well, I had this grandfather, and my grandfather actually did save up every day to start his own farm. He worked really, really hard in that business. He employed all these people. He looked after them all really, really well. As a matter of fact, he didn't prioritize his own retirement, but he prioritized theirs. And then eventually he got sick. And unfortunately, he had to sell the farm and he had to go back. He had to move into this little apartment. He said, I watched my grandfather fade away in front of a TV for the last 10 years of his life. It was horrific. And I just wouldn't wish that on anyone. He said, so I'd like to help people like that. And I said, hang on, I'm confused. Like, your grandfather didn't die. Like, how does life insurance help? He said, well, I discovered these packages that you could actually put your high cash flow from your business in, leverage that for high interest rates, and then turn that into investment property. What he knew, it blew me away. And I said, Nick, how would you like to just work with those people that create things out of nothing, the hustlers of this world that go out and create things to not end up in second-class retirements like your grandfather, but get the retirement they deserve? He said, oh, I'd love that. I said, great, let's call you the hustle lifeguard then. And when somebody asks you what that is, talk about your passion and mission for helping these people that create businesses. Let's focus on the niche of farmers first, and then talk about your mission for helping them turn their cash flow into a retirement that, regardless of what happens, they're going to be safeguarded. And then tell a story. How would that feel? He's like, that would be amazing. So people say, I don't want a niche because they're scared that niching will lose them clients. But truthfully, they also will say, because of that fear, that I care about everyone equally. And there is no way they do. Now, don't get me wrong. I love helping small businesses. I do. I don't care as much about helping corporations. I get hired by corporations a lot to go and speak on introversion and sales. I do a lot of sales kickoffs, but I prefer helping small businesses. But if you ask me to choose between an extrovert and helping an extrovert and choosing an introvert, I care a lot more about helping an introvert. That's why I built the Introvert U platform. It's why I wrote the 2 books in the Introverts Edge series. It means so much more to me. So what does that mean? It means that when you get me up to speak from stage, or when you get me on a podcast interview, I can speak with more passion, more engagement, more focus, and I can make it more relevant to the people I'm speaking to. Now, if you're an extrovert listening to this, and you haven't tuned out, because, I mean, truthfully, you're not going to. I mean, hopefully you engage with my passion. Hopefully, usually you know someone that is introverted, so the content is engaging still. And usually the strategies can still help a lot of people. You know, I feel, I mean, this isn't new stuff. Brian Tracy says the top 10% of all sales performers have a planned presentation. The rest just say whatever comes out of their mouth, which is why extroverts are better at that. But the top 10%, funnily enough, more introverts than extroverts. So because of that, my content is still relevant, but for the introverts, they see me as the only logical choice. Now, if you think about coming on podcast interviews, going to networking events, I don't want somebody to go, Matt's a nice guy, he's got some great content. I want people to go, oh my gosh, this person is exactly for me. Out of everybody that I've met, this person is built to service me. And when you have someone that thinks that way, they don't care if you have a follow-up email sequence. They don't care if they happen to run into you or you do a retargeting campaign. They are going to find a way to chase you. See, one of the things I talk about is that if you can't successfully articulate the value of what you provide and impart in a meaningful way that you are the only choice to that person when somebody's politely speaking to you in a networking room, there's no chance online when people give you a fraction of a second. That is why people go to tons of networking events, because they're trying to get in front of more people because they've got a vanilla message for everybody. So they've got to go more to luck into a deal. And then on top of that, that's why people are doing a podcast episode every day, a blog post every day, taking a photo of their donut for something to say online, because they're trying to be in front of you all the time so that they're constantly reminding you of who they are. Where if your message resonates with them, they're going to find a way to get in contact with you. They're going to follow your stuff as opposed to you having to follow and chase them.
How can we differentiate ourselves in the marketplace and stop competing on price?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, Nick was a great example of that. I mean, he started by trying to sell insurance. And as a vanilla insurance salesperson, firstly, no one would want to talk to him. But then secondly, if for lack of a better option, we have to compete on price. But when you are truly differentiated, then you don't have to compete on price. Like I am the rapid growth guy. Go and find another one like me. It's trademark. You won't find one, right? So now the next thing is I will say to people that, how can you possibly define the value of what you provide by a functional skill? That's like saying I read the book, The Introvert's Edge, and now I am the Introvert's Edge. You are a byproduct of your life experience, your past customers, your unique upbringing, your unique talents, the hard-learned skills and talents that you have. And nobody else has a mix exactly like you. And your passions apply to a certain demographic. So when you say, how do I stop competing on price? What you're really saying is, how do I get somebody to see my difference? Well, the answer is you have to articulate it, and you've got to stop being a vanilla to everybody. Because the truth is that if I just said I'm a sales and marketing trainer and, I work with everybody, well, I'd be competing on price. But because I'm the rapid growth guy that specializes in just introverted service providers, then that group doesn't care what I cost. They want to work with me, and you need to do the same for you. And sometimes things will surprise you. I'll give you another example. I worked with a language coach out of California. She taught kids and adults Mandarin. And she comes to me and she's like, Matt, I used to charge $50 to $80 an hour successfully for years. Now people are coming to me and they're like, around the corner, there's another person that just started their business. They just moved to California. They're charging $30 to $40 an hour. Why would I hire you? And her best answer is, better service, I'm more knowledgeable. Everyone says that. So they went with the other person. Then on top of that, there were people advertising to do it for $12 an hour on Craigslist, thanks to this global economy we now live in, directly from China. And then on top of that, thanks to our friends in Silicon Valley, there's technology. Linda, I'll teach you Mandarin, you teach me English. We just won't charge anyone anything. So now she's competing against free. She's like, how do I compete in this crowded marketplace? I'm like, you can't, because price is the only variable. Let's look at your unique skills. Of the hundreds of people she worked with, there were these two executives that she worked with far more than just Mandarin education. These were executives being relocated to China, and she helped them understand the difference of respect. Like handing over a business card has to be done in a certain way in China. If you don't do it that way, it's disrespectful. Why learning the language isn't enough. You have to reduce your accent, how e-commerce is different in China versus the Western world, and how they buy differently. It blew me away that, in China, they're not going to meet with you one time and then, go to that classic, what do we do in America? So does that sound like it works for you? I guess if I'm a horrible salesperson, I'd say that. And they'll say yes, no, or everyone's favorite. Let me think about it. Then I check in next week and ask the same question. If you still say you're thinking, I know my deal's dead. In China, they're going to want to meet with you 5 or 6 times before they discuss business. They're probably going to want to see you drunk over karaoke once or twice. It's just who they are, but it's because they're talking about 25 to 100-year deals, not transactional relationships. I'm like, Wendy, you do so much more for these people than just language tuition. What do you do? And she's like, she was stuck in her functional skills. She's just, so many people are. They do so many things for their clients, but they don't articulate when they're trying to get the deal. So price is the only choice. I said, Wendy, is it fair to assume as a result of the assistance you're giving these people, they're going to be more successful when they get to China? And she's like, well, yeah, that's the point, right? I said, great, let's call you the China Success Coach then. Forget about Mandarin education for a second. That's going to be an easy sell to these people. Let's focus on creating what we ended up calling the China Success Intensive, which was a 5-week program that worked with the executive, the spouse, and the children to be relocated across to China. She loved the idea of that, but she's like, well, who do I sell it to? What she's asking is, who do I network with? And I said, well, who do you think? She said, well, obviously the executive. I'm like, yeah, I see that. I mean, I was terrified moving from Australia to the United States. Imagine going to China. I just don't think it's your only client. She's like, well, obviously the company would pay. And I'm like, yeah, I understand. A lot of times they have millions of dollars riding on the executive being successful. I still don't think it's your ideal client though. Frustrated, she says, well, who then? I said, I think your ideal client is the immigration attorney. And she looked at me, she's like, what? I said, think about it. They make $5,000 to $7,000 for doing all the paperwork, all the bureaucracy to help someone get relocated to China. They got to get a client, they got to pay staff, they got a lot to deal with. They'd be lucky to make $3,000 to do the visa. I said, just offer them $3,000 for a simple introduction. So she started networking with immigration attorneys. She called herself the China Success Coach. She talked about her passion and mission for serving immigration attorneys and their clientele that went to China. They love the idea. They're like, simple introduction, double my profit. What have I got to say? And all they said was, congratulations, you've now got your visa. I just want to double check you're as ready as possible to be relocated to China. The executive would say, I think we're set. We got our place sorted. We're learning the language. Kids are getting pretty good at it too. Now, we've got our visa all sorted. I think we're good to go. And they just say, there's a lot more to it than that. I think you need to speak to the China Success Coach. They didn't care about price, by the way. She charged $30,000 for doing this. It was a 5-week program minus a $3,000 commission. She made $27,000 for the easiest sale in the world instead of struggling every day to sell language coaching for $50 to $80 an hour as a functional skill. That's the power of taking a sidestep and saying, what are the things I do above and beyond my functional skill? And then what is the higher level benefit? For Wendy, it was rapport, relationship, and e-commerce. The high level benefit was China success. For me, I'm a business coach, I'm a branding expert, I'm a social media strategist. Truthfully, I'm too many things. Nobody cares. They don't care how hard it was for me to learn these things or how much effort I put into learning them, how long it took me to learn them. But when I say I'm the rapid growth guy and I specialize helping introverted service providers obtain rapid growth, it's that simplicity that gets me heard in the crowded marketplace.
And I love that you said that. And I just had a little deja vu when I was doing social media the other day. I was looking at my friend's social media. She's 75. I'll call her out, Ruby Carter Pipes. She's a bodybuilder. And I'm like, she's kicking my ass. And I looked, I'm like, well, what is she doing? And I'm like, oh, she's just doing exercise and workout stuff. And I know I've always heard that whatever's close to you that you do well, you don't realize that it's a gift that other people admire or want to learn from. So I was like, oh, okay. So I did like a split reel. I was like, okay, I'm going to do this man maker exercise I like to do with dumbbells. And within like a few minutes, it went up to 3,500 like views. And so it was like that lesson in, I thought, oh, I've got to do what these other people are doing. I've got to write this long paragraph out. I don't have time for all that. And I'm like, oh, you mean I can just do this? Okay. That comes easy to me.
Yeah, I think if people lean into who they are as opposed to trying to be someone that they're not, I mean, everyone's trying to copy the most successful people in the business, but the thing they don't realize is the people that are most successful in the business got there because they leaned into their uniqueness. You can't compete with their uniqueness because you're not unique in the same way.
Right.
So that's why I always tell people, it's interesting. I did this event, the National Freelance Conference in Texas, and when I did it, I did this exercise where I help people create their unified message and discover their niche of willing to buy clients. And at the end of the exercise, I said, who here now has a unified message, their version of the China Success Coach, the rapid growth guy, in a way that will excite and inspire other people to want to know more about them? And who's identified a niche of people that they think will be willing to pay them what they're worth? And like 97% of the room put their hands up, which sounds great until I tell you the next part of the story. I said, look, do me a favor. The whole session was 90 minutes long. I said, do me a favor, just keep your hands up if this is the most time you spent actively working on your marketing since you started your business. I worked with a personal trainer. It's funny to your story. We called him the strength architect, and he worked specifically with people to regain their strength after pregnancy. His business had been plateaued for years. All of a sudden, he started to get growth. How? Because apparently niching excludes you. No, because in the world of digital marketing, in the world of digital period, you can use technology, psychology, and strategy to get your ideal clients to chase you. Now, you would think, oh, well, hang on a second. I don't want to spend money on ads. Maybe he did. No, he did not. He just shared his unique message in a totally free way, but he was more concise about those that he served, and everything shifted. So what I would really recommend that everybody does is lean into that uniqueness. And by the way, you don't need to hire me for that. I mean, you can go to matthewpollard.com/growth, and there you'll be able to download that same 5-step template I ran through with people. Now, Don't do it by yourself, though. One of the things I always recommend is find somebody else, get them to listen to this podcast interview and get them to do it with you, and use somebody that's not from the same industry as you. So if you're in the fitness space, do not work with someone else in the fitness space, because you'll both get stuck in your industry jargon. Like, go and work with a florist. If you're a florist, go work with an attorney. Like, find somebody that's totally separate to what you do and do this exercise. Do 90 minutes on each of you, and you'll find that all of a sudden you'll have this message to share and you'll define your niche. The problem is that we are scared to niche down, and then secondly, we don't know how, and we don't know if we're making the right choice. Introverts specifically are very practically minded and very safe thinkers. But what you've got to realize is staying hedging means you actually have limited ability to actually get anybody to say, wow, that's inspiring, I want to work with you. You have to niche down, you have to make that tough decision, and forevermore, you will find that you'll do really well. And I will say, occasionally somebody will say, well, I picked this niche because that's the one I know I can make the most money out of. If there's no passion there, I promise you, you'll make more money, even if the answer doesn't naturally apply to you straight away. If you just say, this is the niche I'm going to work with because I'm passionate about it, you will find it will not take very long, but your brain needs time to go, okay, he's really decided this is the direction we're going. Let me start serving up the answers of how we're going to make money out of this. Otherwise, you just start thinking about how other people make money, what the practical decision is, and you go back to vanilla. So really lean into where your passions are, and you'll find everything shifts.
I love that. Now, I know we don't have much time left. This has been such a treat today. I'm enjoying you immensely, and I'm sure the audience is as well. What are 5 quick tips for rapid growth in our business?
Absolutely. Well, if you're an introvert, let's start with the obvious one. You need to believe in yourself and your ability to succeed. Like Henry Ford had this statement, if you think you can or if you think you can't, you're right. Well, if you think you can't, you don't put any energy into succeeding, right? Because you already know you're going to fail, and your mindset is on don't miss, don't miss, don't miss, as opposed to I'm going to get this in, right? So you really need to believe in yourself and believe it's possible. The second one is that if you don't niche, you don't grow, because the fact is that if the only choice is price, then price is what you're going to have to compete on, and that's a long spiral to the bottom. The third is that if you're going to niche, you also need to differentiate, because if you just say I'm an accountant, it doesn't matter if you then say but I'm a niche, it comes across as a marketing technique. So you need to differentiate, you need to lean into your strengths for why you're passionate about that niche, why you have the skill sets to serve that niche, and even lean into really thinking about what the daily life of that niche is. And then you need to learn how to articulate your passion and mission for serving that niche. If you can do that, then as opposed to I do this, I've got this experience, I love to see this, I hate to see this, I'm on a mission to do this, all of a sudden people will see you very differently. And then the last one is that if you don't know how to sell, you need to learn to, because the truth is that if you don't know how to turn interest into money, you're not going to be in business for very long. So you need to lean into a system. Now, I will tell you, just like everything, there are 1,000 books written by introverts on the topic of sales. Mine has the word introvert on the cover, which is why it sold 75,000, 80,000 copies, and it's in 16 languages, because it's the only one that exists. But I can tell you,
niched it.
Exactly. But I told people all over the world that I'm friends with that they should write a book on introverted selling, because with my reading disabilities, I had a reading speed of a 6th grader in late high school. I mean, it was funny. I had funny colored lenses. I actually have them here. I put these on and miraculously I can learn to read. Not like everyone else, but I could start the process of learning. But can you imagine being a kid that was introverted with acne, reading speed issues, self-confidence issues, and now funny glasses? Of course, I was scared to talk to my own friends, let alone anyone else. But when I learned to sell, I started telling everybody I knew that was great at sales, someone should write a book on introverted selling, and nobody did. So because of that, eventually I worked with a ghostwriter, and we worked together and we created the Introvert's Edge, which was so successful, we created the Introvert's Edge to networking. So realize that there is a system for everything. And, while the Introvert's Edge book series talks about sales and networking, we also have a really great platform called introvertu.com, which covers a lot of the other topics, where I've brought in other introverted experts, or what I call introverted titans, which are amazing in industry that just happen to be introverted as well. And then, there's a ton of stuff that I produce and put out for free. I learned to sell watching YouTube videos. So I put a ton on YouTube. I put a ton on social media all over the place. Focus on, though, picking one system. whether it's sales, networking, public speaking, leadership, whatever it is, don't focus on learning all of them, focus on one, and then focus on one person's strategy or system. Even if it's not mine, pick one. And the reason I suggest that is sales, networking, leadership. It's not like mixed martial arts, right? You want to focus on just getting the basics done, and then you can improve on it. And introverts, they do what I call, it's classic, what I call busy procrastination. They keep reading more books and try to piece it all together to make the perfect system for them. And then they never actually do anything, and then they overcomplicate it and they'd end up taking no action. So just pick one system. And if that system's mine, I mean, you're welcome to pick up. In my my first book, The Introvert's Edge, I say, if you just download that first chapter, which you can do at theintrovertsedge.com, look at what you currently say and realize that it doesn't fit under the chapter headings that I give you, because I give you the order of the sales process. You'll realize some certain things don't fit, throw it out. You shouldn't be saying it to customers. Some things are out of order and there's some gaping holes. If you do that, you'll double your sales in the next 60 days. And then you can pick perfecting that or moving to the next system. But as an introvert, we need to build self-efficacy that we can succeed. And if you follow those steps and then follow it to one process, whether it be sales, networking, or whatever you choose, you'll start to realize you can do it, and you actually can do it better than everybody else. And once you've realized that your introversion is an edge, there's just no stopping you.
I love what you said about just adding one system at a time. I've been working at growth, and this is my third expansion of my fitness boutique for women. And so I am realizing now at the point that I'm at that all of these systems are working together. And now I'm like, I'm in the groove, like I'm jiving, and I'm like, okay, now we're cooking with gas. Like this is it. But it took all of these steps. So like just taking the first step, the second step, they all lead you to the best business you could ever have. And I have truly, this has been a treat. I've enjoyed your vibrant energy, and everything you had to say was spot on. So I want to thank you for coming on the Sisterhood today.
It was my absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And thanks everybody for listening to this episode. Make sure to reach out, let us know what resonated with you on this episode, and give Matthew some love. The Introvert's Edge and the Introvert's Edge of Networking. Is that what the second one is?
That's right.
And those are two books that I plan on checking out for sure. And so thank you again, and keep on keeping on, everybody, as always.